This is Los Angeles, California, one of the most famous and attractive cities in the United States, often called its second capital. Business districts, Hollywood celebrities. Massive concerts, it all happens here, but what you're seeing now is the classic image of LA. The one you see in movies, music videos, or read about in magazines. There's another side to this city. The unofficial title of second capital didn't come from wealth, but from a huge concentration of crime. Los Angeles is known as the birthplace of many American street gangs and criminal organizations. In the same city where the massive film industry was born and grew, a group of young troublemakers, now known as the 18th Street Gang, was also gaining power. This is considered one of the most aggressive criminal groups in Los Angeles, one that managed to spread its influence across different countries: Canada, Mexico, Honduras, Spain, and El Salvador. However, the situation in El Salvador has recently gotten complicated for them, although the gang maintains connections from Central America all the way to Canada. Its influence in El Salvador dropped sharply after a nationwide campaign launched by President Nayib Bukele in March 2022, during operations that continued through 2023. Security forces detained more than 10,000 suspected members. Many were forced to go into hiding or flee the country. Even so, the 18th Street Gang still represents a serious criminal presence in the region. Their structure is pretty unusual. It's a network of individuals or smaller groups connected together, which, depending on their size, can control a street, a block, or even an entire neighborhood. Back in 2008, the estimated number of members ranged from 30 to 50,000 people. About 80% of them were undocumented migrants from Mexico and Central America. This group formed the core of the organization. Large waves of migration allowed them to establish a presence in 50 cities across 28 states at that time. Think about that. There are criminal groups that operate nationwide, but having a presence in 28 states is an extremely high number. They're involved in illegal trade, assaults, car theft, extortion, targeted attacks, fraud, and other criminal activities. Their sheer scale even allowed them to surpass members of the Crips and Bloods in total numbers, not everywhere, of course, but still. To outnumber the largest African American gangs in the United States on their own turf is no small feat. Wherever the 18th Street Gang appeared, conflict and violence followed. Law enforcement agencies faced challenges that, as we've seen, were incredibly difficult to resolve. In this video, we're going to talk about the unique 18th Street Gang. How did a small group of teenagers grow into an international organization? What makes this gang so different? How does it function? What are its key traits? And what happened to its members in El Salvador? You can support this video with a like or a comment. The origins of the gang trace back to the 1960s and migrants from Central and South America. Some sources suggest the story began a decade earlier, but that doesn't change the big picture. Hundreds of thousands of people came to the United States searching for a better life. Starting over in a new country without money or savings was extremely hard. As a result, some newcomers joined local street groups, which were widespread during the 1950s and 60s. Criminal groups have always existed in the United States. In this case, migrants became part of the Clanton 14 Gang, one of the oldest criminal organizations in Los Angeles. The main feature of that group was its strict membership rules. Only Mexicans were allowed to join. Because of this, many young people were left out. Those who couldn't find a place decided to form their own organization. That's how the 18th Street Gang emerged. The group took its modern form in the 1980s after breaking away from Clanton 14. They first gained major public attention during the Los Angeles riots following the acquittal of police officers involved in the beating of Rodney King. The Rodney King incident happened in the 90s, which we'll discuss later. Right now, we're focused on the formation stage. During this time, the founders, who were mostly teenagers, were developing their own rules, ideas, and methods of making money. Initially, the many cliques lacked a clear structure or leadership. They were loosely connected to existing Mexican groups operating in Southern California. Most of their activity took place in Korean neighborhoods or central areas of LA. Over time, these cliques expanded, Researcher Alex Alonso states that the gang's historical territories include 5 districts of Los Angeles: East Side, North Side, South Central, South Side, and West Side. Despite other groups already being in these areas, the new organization quickly increased its influence. Large migrant communities provided the opportunity to organize across different neighborhoods. It was easier for smaller groups to unite under stronger leadership. Most importantly, there was no strict racial division. Control over neighborhoods and aggressive expansion helped them gain a reputation as one of the most ruthless groups in Los Angeles. The 18th Street Gang, often called an army of children, built its empire by recruiting from elementary schools. This unusual strategy worked because who would suspect a child of being a courier for illegal goods? This model allowed the gang to expand its operations at an astonishing speed, transforming from a local street group into an organization with a presence in Canada, Mexico, Spain, and even Lebanon. Their recruitment methods are chillingly effective, targeting kids and teenagers from unstable homes with promises of money and protection. But once you're in, getting out is nearly impossible. Leaving is seen as betrayal, and the consequences are severe. For most, membership becomes a lifelong sentence. Even if someone manages to escape, the gang will often hunt them down. So, how does one even join? The main requirement isn't about language or background. It's about understanding and completing tasks. The initiation ritual, however, is a bit more intense. For men, it often involves a timed physical test or carrying out a direct order from a leader. Women have a few different paths to membership, some less aggressive than others. Like joining through a relationship with an existing member, the gang structure is decentralized. It's not a top-down pyramid. Instead, it's a network of cliques, each led by a toro. These leaders oversee soldiers and associates who handle the day-to-day illegal activities. What's fascinating is how much the gang's operations change from place to place. In Southern California, some cliques have ties to the Mexican mafia, while in Central America, their biggest rival is the infamous MS-13. A truce was attempted back in 2012, but it quickly fell apart. Both sides just used the break to rearm and recruit, and the conflict for territory and influence rages on. You might hear them called by different names: Barrio 18, Mar 18, or an L, a name from the Pico Union area. But the number 18 always stays, a symbol of their identity. A member's reputation is built on the tasks they complete. The more they do, the more respect they earn. Each clique controls a specific territory, a system that really took hold in the 1980s when thousands fled the civil war in El Salvador and came to the U.S. For many refugee families, options were scarce. Parents worked long hours for low pay, and their children were easy targets for gangs offering quick cash. Saying no was hardly an option when the gang controlled your entire neighborhood. Over the years, their criminal portfolio grew to include everything from car theft and drug distribution to arms trafficking and extortion. What started with street-level troublemakers has morphed into a powerful international criminal enterprise with a complex and brutal history. Let's dive into the world of the 18th Street Gang, also known as Barrio 18, and like a traditional top-down structure. This group was made up of separate, independent units called cliques. The leaders of these cliques were all equals. They'd communicate, cooperate, and make decisions together, but no one person was in charge of everyone. Inside this system, there was no room for second guessing. If a leader gave an order, you did it, no questions asked. Trying to get out of a task meant punishment, and the more important the job, the more severe the consequences. Members knew the risks from day one. For many, there were only 3 ways out: jail, the hospital, or the grave, even though they acted independently. The cliques were all in the same line of work, distributing illegal substances, stealing cars, organizing robberies, and carrying out targeted attacks. They also collected taxes from anyone wanting to run illegal businesses on their turf. This strict control worked. By the early 1990s, the 18th Street Gang had become the largest and most influential criminal organization in Los Angeles. They didn't just expand, they made their presence known everywhere. You'd see their graffiti marking their territory, a clear warning to other groups to stay away. One of the most famous examples is the La Vida Loca mural, a massive piece of street art that showcased their lifestyle, hierarchy, and most powerful figures. These symbols were their way of drawing lines on the map and showing just how far their control reached. Of course, this kind of expansion didn't go unnoticed. Law enforcement started paying close attention. In 2011, a huge wave of arrests swept across the United States. This was the result of a 15-month investigation using surveillance, wiretaps, and undercover agents. The investigation uncovered a massive operation to recruit new members from outside the U.S., helping them cross the border illegally. But that wasn't all. They were also running a sophisticated counterfeit document operation. These fake IDs allowed people to get jobs, drive cars, claim government benefits, and create entirely new identities. This wasn't just small-time crime, it posed a serious threat to national security. Authorities shut down a facility that could pump out dozens of forged documents in just a few hours. With prices hitting $100 apiece, the whole setup was highly organized, with supervisors, street-level dealers, photo preppers, and couriers. To avoid suspicion, they often used minors for deliveries. Everyone involved ended up with a prison sentence, but for a group like Barrio 18, prison isn't the end, it's just another office. Correctional facilities often become new headquarters for recruitment and coordination. Take Guatemala, for example. There, incarcerated leaders, known as ruedas, continue to run their operations from behind bars. The groups they control on the outside are organized into territorial units called canchas. Within these canchas, you have supporters who aren't full members. They help with tasks and collect payments, but staying unofficial has its perks. It's easier to hide people and maintain safe houses. Then there are the paces. Young people who hang around the group. They act as lookouts, gathering information on locals and reporting strange cars in the area. It's a one-way street. The paces provide intel, and in return, they get food and a little cash for essentials, like burner phones to report their findings. In the old days, Barrio 18 was more like a tight-knit family. Today, it's transforming into something that looks more like a ruthless corporation. The leadership is all about the bottom line, pushing subordinates to generate more profit by any means necessary. This internal pressure is causing cracks in the foundation, slowly weakening the once unstoppable organization from the inside out. Meet Frank Puppet Martinez. Covered in tattoos, he wasn't just a member of the Barrio 18 gang, he was one of its most powerful leaders. From inside prison, he controlled multiple factions. But Puppet's strategy was unique. Instead of trying to unify every gang under his command, he built business alliances. This approach surrounded him with loyal allies, and his influence spread far beyond the prison walls. In 2002, the FBI finally caught up with him. Martinez was convicted of racketeering and homicide-related charges and sent to a high-security prison. But even behind bars, he and his inner circle were treated like royalty. While Puppet was the undisputed leader, his wife, Jenny Garcia, also known as Lady Vaz, ran the day-to-day operations. She managed the money and resolved financial disputes. Her right-hand man was a fixer named Romero, nicknamed Termite. He handled the toughest problems, commanding his own crew of fighters. He wasn't just muscle, he was a problem solver. This powerful structure seemed unbreakable, but a single event brought it all crashing down. In 1999, federal agents raided Jenny Garcia's home. They found huge sums of hidden cash, $9,000 in one bundle, $80,000 in another, and a staggering $450,000 in a third. The gang immediately suspected a leak. Who could have known about the cash? The finger pointed at the one person closest to Lady Vaz, Romero Termite. Garcia reported the supposed betrayal to her husband in prison. Puppet, believing his loyal fixer had turned on him, was furious. He wrote that the empire they built wasn't meant to fall so easily and demanded revenge. A hit squad was sent after Termite. They ambushed him, opening fire with multiple weapons, but somehow he survived. Now hunted by his former allies, Termite had no choice. He went to the FBI and told them everything. He laid out the entire inner workings of Barrio 18. giving law enforcement an unprecedented look into their secret world. This intel was a goldmine for future investigations, but it didn't lead to immediate mass arrests. The gang was too widespread and discreet. Taking out one member could trigger a war. By this time, Barrio 18 had already expanded beyond the U.S. into several other countries. A direct confrontation was too risky, even for federal authorities. So, they changed tactics. Law enforcement began using U.S. immigration policy as a weapon. They started identifying migrants as suspected gang members. Active members were prosecuted, and suspected ones were deported. This strategy didn't crush the gang, it just pushed it further into other regions, especially Honduras and El Salvador. But there, local authorities reacted much more aggressively. Simply having a gang-related tattoo could get you arrested. The U.S. also expanded the list of crimes that led to deportation, effectively exporting gang members to neighboring countries. In places like Mexico, Colombia, and Honduras, these deported members regrouped, expanded their operations, and even strengthened cross-border smuggling routes. In response, Central American governments launched their own iron fist policies in the late 90s. Starting in El Salvador, these laws led to mass arrests, but they had an unintended consequence. By packing prisons with gang members, they inadvertently created networking hubs where the gangs reorganized and became even stronger. Faced with new pressures, the gangs adapted. They moved beyond extortion and small-time drug sales into more sophisticated money laundering schemes, using legitimate businesses like car washes as fronts. This made their criminal enterprises much harder to trace. Today, the core operations of the 18th Street Gang haven't changed much. They use the same methods to make money and regroup, though modern technology has made communication easier. Despite thousands of arrests worldwide, the gang continues to recruit new members, terrorize communities, and exploit the vulnerable. You might think of gangs as a local problem, but groups like Barrio 18 operate on an international scale. This isn't just about the United States, it stretches across Honduras, Guatemala, and even El Salvador, where some of the toughest anti-gang policies are in effect. Despite not having one single leader, these groups stay connected, coordinating activities from North America all the way to Central America. Their main threat is their sheer number and their vast reach. Naturally, this kind of cross-border activity grabs the attention of law enforcement. And while gangs can hide their operations for a while, it's usually just a matter of time before authorities uncover their methods. But here's the twist, arresting them doesn't always weaken them. For many members, life behind bars isn't that different from life on the street. In fact, prison can sometimes become a recruitment center and a place to build influence. Correctional facilities are fertile ground for finding new members, gaining street cred, and expanding networks, even when leaders are supposedly isolated. Figures like Barrio 18's Frank Martinez have found ways to run things from the inside. Some members even team up with the powerful Mexican mafia, uniting various street gangs under the Sorrewo's banner. On the outside, they might be rivals, but inside prison, they often operate as one. Deportation is another tool authorities use, but it's a slow and complicated process. Take the case of José Miguel Hernández Garcia. In 2016, U.S. immigration ordered his deportation, but first, he had to serve a 3-year prison sentence in Pennsylvania for a serious assault. Only after his sentence, and because he was a foreign national convicted of a major crime, could he be sent back to El Salvador. And what happened when he got there? He was immediately arrested again, this time accused of being a leader in the 18th Street Gang in his home country. The truth is, no matter where they are, gang life rarely has a happy ending. Whether they're locked up, on the streets, or trying to get out, most members face a grim reality. They either spend their lives in and out of prison or die in violent conflicts. The romanticized idea of a legendary criminal career is a myth for all but a few. Most remain anonymous foot soldiers who meet the same tragic fate. Yet, despite the harsh laws and constant pressure, these groups still manage to pull in young people, creating devastating social consequences. A chilling example comes from El Salvador in November 2021. Clashes between MS-13 and Barrio 18 erupted, leading to dozens of deaths in just 3 days, including many innocent civilians. The scale of the violence was a wake-up call. The government's response was swift and brutal. President Nayib Bukele declared a state of emergency in March 2022. This wasn't just a few arrests, it was a massive, nationwide crackdown. Tens of thousands of suspected gang members were detained, for the first time in years. Barrio 18 lost its grip on key territories and sources of income. Violence plummeted to its lowest level since the country's civil war ended in 1992. Inspired by this, Honduras tried a similar state of emergency, but the results were far less effective. Barrio 18's power there remained largely intact. It's hard to say what the long-term effects of these harsh crackdowns will be. Reports from El Salvador describe incredibly strict prison conditions. But even in total isolation, the mindset that fuels these gangs often persists. It's this deep-rooted identity that makes them so resilient and dangerous. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. If you found it informative, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. See you next time.